Hi, my name is Ann Graf, and I am an assistant professor at Simmons University in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. I'm going to be talking today about images of COVID-19 graffiti on Instagram. The graffiti art community is historically quick to respond to social concerns with vibrant images in public spaces. The COVID-19 pandemic was no exception. While research for many academics was either slowed or halted, or at the very least changed by the isolation imposed by the pandemic, the artistic expression of graffiti artists and the documentation of their works could still take place in relative safety, and in some discussions online it was evident that some artists even felt more freedom to create during the early lockdown era as the streets were far less crowded. In parallel, academic examination of such works on the popular image sharing site Instagram could also take place in a very accessible way from the quarantine comfort of the home office so many of us found ourselves working in as institutions closed their doors to slow the spread of the virus. My previous research has examined how graffiti art is being documented around the world. This was interesting to me because of the nature of graffiti art and street art, the fact that it is often illegal and not part of the traditional art institutional setting, and therefore not documented according to the formal practices that are used within the modern museum environment. While I teach art documentation at Simmons, and we learn about the formal standards, schemas, software, and controlled vocabularies used by art galleries, museums, and other cultural heritage institutions to document artworks, I'm particularly interested in the facets of documentation used by those recording this non-traditional work because they're not operating as a formal group, but rather developing their own ad hoc methods for gathering images of the works, describing them, sharing them, and organizing them by various characteristics. So to determine how these things were being carried out around the world, I looked at over 200 websites dedicated to sharing images of graffiti and street art. This examination was combined with interviews with as many website curators as I could engage to ask about what I had found in the website examination. This resulted in 4 overarching categories that were being used to organize images of graffiti art: supports, work types, locations, and then a catch-all category that I just call other, for things that really didn't fit in the other main categories. This includes things like the names of artists, the names of specific events, galleries, the year something was produced or shared. It's hard to know whether something was new to the site, old inside, if it was a memorial to somebody who had passed on, which is often tagged RIP, things like this, etc. So for this current research, on 2 separate days in late April and early May last year, when we in the United States were still rather new to the pandemic experience, I searched for 2 tags on Instagram: COVID graffiti and coronavirus graffiti. There were 157 and 174 posts, respectively, using these tags at the time. I gathered screenshots of all images with these 2 tags, either of these tags, that were actually of graffiti art. There were a couple things that did not have images representing any graffiti artworks, and so those were excluded. Examination of the images as well as the co-accompanying tags, the texts, the locations, and numerous other facets of the works reveals a number of visual themes in response to this very serious global challenge. Here's the front page of a post, just to give you an idea what it looks like. When there are multiple images in a post, remember on Instagram you can have up to 10 images in a single post. I captured the text on the right side of the first image, and then the rest of the images attached to the post were captured but without the text because the text remains the same. I captured things like the account name, the location, which was sometimes under the account name, but that doesn't always mean that's where the graffiti work that is featured is from. So sometimes I'd have to dig into the tags for better location information. Sometimes this requires a little bit of research, and often you just could not determine where the location was. You can see in this particular slide that the account name is kelvin.crime, and the image is tagged as a work that is in Los Angeles, California. You can see that in the tags. I also captured the text of the post, the other tags, including the emoji tags, and how many likes there were at the time it was posted, although I didn't end up using that in the research. Now remember, when a user tags their work with one of the 2 tags included in this research, they may be simply indicating that this work was done during the pandemic, and it doesn't necessarily relate artistically to COVID-19, but most often the works do. This is just giving you a quick word cloud showing you the location information that I was able to suss out of the data here. These are the named cities. Cities were named 178 times, and there were 88 individual cities named. You can see New York City in the middle is where graffiti is pretty much credited as being born, modern graffiti. And then you have Austin, Dortmund, Bristol, London, etc. And I have to say here that most of these are English-speaking countries, not all of them, but many of them with the largest numbers were English-speaking countries because the tags that I used were English tags. They were in the English language. So it does color some of the research, and I have to be aware of that. Same thing with the countries here. There were 192 times that a specific country was evident. There were 36 individual countries named, also one generically labeled the Middle East that is not included in the chart here. And again, the United States was the largest country represented in this data, and then followed by England and Canada, and then other countries below that were with lesser counts. And again, the top three are English-speaking, largely English-speaking countries. And again, that's just part of the research because of the tags that I was looking at. Now, I would like to share a number of images that illustrate the themes that were present in the works, and I'd like to talk my way through them. I situate this research in the work I've already done on graffiti art documentation around the world, so I'm going to be referencing some of the categories and facets for information organization that I've already documented in my work. Images of people wearing masks were very common from all around the world. This was one of the most popular visual themes in this research, which is not a big surprise. We all had to learn how to mask up during the pandemic, and this is evident in the artworks themselves. There were also numerous images that included popular media and known characters and objects like Homer Simpson and SpongeBob. Batman was featured a couple times in the artworks that I found, and this may be related to the fact that some researchers think that the coronavirus began in bats. Not sure about the research there, but it did show up. You can see the Hollywood sign from Hollywood, California turned into coronavirus, and Mona Lisa saying 6 feet, y'all, which is also referring to how far apart we're supposed to be standing if you're in the US, where we still use feet instead of meters. And then there was the Corona versus Corona. And here we have an image showing popular rapper Drake, and then we see that he doesn't like Corona, meaning COVID-19, but Corona the beer, that's great. So this was another popular type image. I didn't see other images of Drake, but I did see other images of Corona the beer, so that was another thing that came up. We saw at the beginning when I started talking about images, the visual theme of masking was very common in the works. Also, physical masks were added to pre-existing objects or artworks as a type of intervention. And this itself may not be considered graffiti, but it is crossing over into street art or urban art. It's making a statement, and this itself has always been a type of interventional art, adding things to other things that are already there. On the right in Portuguese, it says, while there are people who say that death is inevitable, there's graffiti happening around the world, you know? So again, masks were a very important visual theme. There were several images involving toilet paper and how people were hoarding it and worrying about running out of it. This was something that was very common in the United States, and I don't know if it happened all over the world, but I kind of assume it might have. People were kind of hoarding supplies. So this was a very common theme in the data. There's also a number of visual themes that related to political and social commentary. Now, I'm starting right now with the United States. These images here are all from the United States, and we here in the US, we're in a very singular kind of situation in our nation. We had a very controversial leadership going on at the time, and we also had a number of social issues that were at the forefront of life here in America, dealing with the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of innocent Black people by police, things like this. And so there was a lot of images that had to do with U.S. political or social commentary, and you can see some of those here. And then there was also a number of U.S. political and social commentary images that were relating specifically to our former president in the United States. So again, there was a large sample of these as well, dealing with the idiocy of some of the things that this man said. There was also international social and political commentary, and a lot of this was from Britain, probably again because of the English language focus that just was inherent in this research. There were many mentions of the NHS or National Health Service, and most of these were negative, just like most of the political things kind of had a negative focus as well in the United States. And in the upper right there, it says, "We stop this virus together." There were many, many images of the actual virus that is represented most commonly by that glob that is often green, but not always, with the knobs all over it. So this was another common theme of the virus itself. There were also protocol messages, many, many protocol messages, including reminders of how to behave to stop the spread of disease, stand 6 feet or 2 meters apart, don't touch your face, wash your hands, pray and wash your hands. And again, in Spanish, on the lower right, stopping the coronavirus is everyone's responsibility. If you protect yourself, you protect others. There were many, many images of thanks to medical workers and portrayals of medical workers as heroes. In the upper left is Dr. Li Wenliang, a Chinese ophthalmologist who raised awareness of early COVID-19 infections in Wuhan, China. He himself died from the virus on February 7th of 2020. And then in the upper right in German, thanks to all the helping trades. So thank you to everyone who's helping out during the pandemic. There were numerous wishes for safety and also asking people to please stay at home. Again, these are like images of protocol, but basically saying to stay home. So this was a specific theme that arose. There were also numerous messages and images of hope. And this was a common theme, and it was also one of the most beautiful themes. This is just a chart showing a little bit about the visual themes that I found. There were 281 posts, and many of these had several images. Altogether, there were 449 individual images captured. Among all of these images, these are the visual themes and how they break out. COVID was coded for the images when it was obvious that the theme or the message had to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. So that might mean that there was an image of the pandemic virus itself, or there were some words that had to deal with the pandemic, anything that really made it obvious that this was a work that was relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then you can see beneath that there are things like masks and virus and the political, social messages, etc. You can see some of the little things in the longer tail there that only showed up a few times. Anything that showed up at least twice was included in this chart here. Now this slide represents some of the graffiti types and the graffiti supports that were seen in the research. This relates directly to my previous research that explored how people around the world were sort of categorizing or grouping images of graffiti art. And types and supports were two of the main ways that the images are organized by all sorts of galleries online around the world. So I wanted to kind of look through this data and see how it related to my previous work. You can see here all of the different types of graffiti that were found. I was applying codes to the images based on known types from my previous research, and those are shown in blue. Characters were very important in this data here, so we saw many different characters in the examples that I've just showed you. Things like Batman and the Mona Lisa and SpongeBob and Drake. Those are called characters when there's a person that shows up. You can go through, and I don't want to take the time to define each one of these, but throwies are a type of graffiti art. Pieces are another type of graffiti art. Wheat paste is a type of graffiti art that is usually created in a studio and then pasted to a surface. So you can see E to E, that would be a train that has graffiti from one end to the other end, and T to B is another one that relates to trains from top to bottom. So that's a taller work. So you can see in blue all the different types. The supports are things on which graffiti is placed, and so this is another important facet that I saw in my research for how collections of graffiti art are organized. And so I also began to code images for the different supports that the works were found on. And just like in my previous research, walls are very important. They are one of the most common surfaces upon which these types of works are found. But you can also see that the black book, the graffiti artist sketchbook, is also very important, as are trains, tunnels, canvases, freights, etc., all the way down until you have things like utility boxes and box trucks. So these were things that relate to my previous research, and I wanted to see how often these things showed up in this kind of research. Now, I had some further questions as I carried out this work, and this is where I find the conference experience is very helpful, because you get to ask other researchers how they go about what they do, how they find what they do. For me personally, I'd like to know how to more successfully dig into Instagram. Instagram is not, at least to somebody who is more from an arts background than a technology background, it's not the easiest place to sample large amounts of data, especially using the tags as ways to capture the data. When you are searching on Instagram, you cannot search for 2 tags at once. You can only search for 1 tag, which is why I chose the tags that I did to seed this research, because they are compound tags that take 2 concepts and combine them into one. And I tried to combine the concept of the graffiti artworks themselves with the COVID-19 pandemic by choosing those tags. So it's very common to use compound hashtags on Instagram. Now, how could somebody who has a more technological background be able to grab more of these works using different means than the simple and sort of manual process that I use to grab this type of data? So that's something that would be very interesting to see. Also, what do the co-occurring hashtags reveal? So I stated at the beginning that I collected all of the hashtags that went with these works, along with those target ones that I was looking at, those 2 target ones. So what do the co-occurring hashtags reveal? What would another harvest of the same hashtags now, nearly a year later, reveal? Anecdotally, I can say that not a lot, there hasn't been a lot of additions since I first collected my data in the late spring of 2020. I think the phenomenon was kind of at its peak, and the tags were being used, these hashtags were being used a lot. Things have kind of shifted, moved on, changed. The next thing has come on, and there's not a lot more. It certainly hasn't taken off into the millions or anything like that. But it would be interesting to see, what has changed in the later part of the pandemic. Now, there were also a small number of duplicate works in the data where different people would take pictures of the same image and post them, and they just happen to have the same hashtags on them. So it would be interesting to see, to take some of these works that are more popular, either by popular artists or because they're large or they're prominent, and be able to see how much more widely they've been documented. Maybe there's probably many, many, many more instances of some of the more popular images, and they just didn't use the hashtags that I was tracking for this research. So that would be another interesting thing to look at. And also, how can projects like urban art mapping, COVID-19 street art, and others best preserve and record and share a record of these ephemeral works? That's always at the background of what I'm doing. That's always what I'm looking at, is a way to find out how they're being documented and how we can better document them so people can find these works, and not only find them, but find them again and use them for research and for enjoyment. Thank you very much for your time. Here's a list of my references, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email is on the slide there. Thank you very much.